If someday you should visit the island of Sodor, you may see Bertie the bus working far from Thomas's branch line. On rare occasions, the Sodor Bus Company is hired out for special tours around the island, where visitors are taken to historic sites such as the Mid-Sodor Railway or Ulfsted Castle. Usually, the other buses are given this duty, but sometimes Bertie is asked to take the tourists. Bertie is always happy to explore more of Sodor, but there is one historic site that he doesn't like going to at all. The standing stones of Kildane are a very ancient part of Sodor's history. Nobody really knows much about them, but visitors are often very intrigued by them, and the site had become quite popular over the years. Bertie never liked going to the stones. The road was narrow and hadn't been very well maintained. Not to mention the stones themselves. For some strange reason, Bertie never liked looking at them. He always felt uncomfortable there and that he wasn't welcome. One gray and wet afternoon, Bertie was telling Thomas about the stones at Farquhar Station.
I'm glad they're closing the road up there.
Why are they closing it?
Well, the council have decided to widen and repair the road leading up to the stones to make it more accessible. I've also heard they'll be starting the restoration of an old church further up the road.
Thomas then smiled. If there was to be any construction done on Sodor, he knew the pack would be at the heart of the operation. Miss Jenny had been given the contract to help with the restoration of the old church and the widening of the road. Each morning, Nelson would bring Oliver and Byron up to Kildane, while Jack, Alfie, Buster, and Patrick made their own way to the site. Byron would use his blade to extend the length of the road, while Patrick prepared the concrete. And when the concrete had been laid, Buster would roll carefully over it. Oliver, Alfie, and Jack would shift any debris from the ruined church and help dig holes for the new walls surrounding the church.
It's nice to be out working again.
Pity the weather is so wet. I'm glad I've got caterpillar tracks to help me grip.
Well, I'm glad I've got tyres. When I slip on the wet grass, I can get covered in mud.
The three diggers laughed and continued working happily in the wet field. Later, Oliver was having his grabber fitted to help remove some of the weakened roof supports. The men were attaching the grabber in the field where the stones were so as not to disturb the other working machines. Once it was fitted and had been checked over, the excavator began to crawl steadily back to work. Suddenly, Oliver felt a pain in his caterpillar tracks and began to slide down the field. With a bump, Oliver hit one of the stones, which fell right into the mud.
How did this happen, Oliver?
I don't know, sir.
His banksmen checked him all over.
One of your wheels must have come off. I'll have a look for it. We'll have you back to work once it's fitted again.
This made Oliver feel a little better, although he felt uneasy being so close to the stones. His banksmen and some of the workmen looked around the field for Oliver's wheel, but they couldn't find it anywhere.
It's no good. We'll have to send you back to the yards and order a new wheel for your tracks. In the meantime, Kelly can help remove the roof supports.
So at the end of the day, they carefully winched Oliver out of the field and onto Nelson's low loader. He and Byron were then taken back to the yards. Jack, Patrick, Alfie, and Buster slowly made their way home too.
Poor Oliver. I hope he gets his tracks mended soon.
His tracks are usually so reliable. I've never seen them break before.
Some strange things happened with us today too. At one point my fire went out while I was rolling the concrete. Not to mention some of the workmen's tools went missing too.
The only thing I'm missing now is my favorite spot in the yards. Hurry it up, Buster.
As they made their way down the new road, Jack peered over and looked at the standing stones, his eyes fixated on the fallen one. He felt an uneasy feeling in the pit of his motor. The next day, Kelly came to remove and replace the roof supports. It took a little while as the wind and rain made it hard for the crane to concentrate, but eventually the job was done.
A fine job as usual, Kelly. You've earned yourself a rest. Off you go.
Thank you, sir!
Kelly then rolled away to join the other machines. While the men were on their tea break, the machines were chattering amongst themselves.
I think that these stones are haunted.
Nonsense! They're just stones! Stones can't be haunted!
I once heard about a boulder that wrecked a whole railway. I think it's fun working on a haunted site.
The site isn't haunted. There's just been a series of inconveniences. Now, I think it's best we put this spooky stone story behind us.
They all agreed, except for Alfie, who wouldn't stop going on about the supernatural for the rest of the day. Dark clouds had formed above when it was time to leave. The machines all began to depart from the site and make their way home through the rain. Alfie was rolling cheerfully behind Kelly when suddenly there came a sputtering noise and the little digger stopped.
Alfie? What's going on?
I'm out of fuel, but I had half a fuel tank.
His Banksmen came over to check him over.
We'll have to leave you here overnight, I'm afraid.
Alfie gulped. He had now realized that he had broken down right by the stones.
Here? Overnight?
Don't worry, Alf. We'll be back first thing in the morning. We'll make grumpy old Isabella bring you some more fuel.
This made Alfie feel a little better, although he began to have a sinking feeling as he watched the others roll home, the rain beginning to sting his face. The storm raged across the island. The fierce winds ripped tiles off roofs and even derailed some rolling stock. Thankfully, it had passed by morning, and the pack were hurrying back up to Alfie. When they arrived at the site, Alfie was shuddering violently and had his eyes clenched shut. He seemed to be muttering in a harsh tone. Jack raced over to him.
Alfie, are you all right?
It was horrible, Jack. I could hear their screams, their desperate cries for help. But I couldn't help them, Jack. I couldn't help them.
Jack and the pack were stunned into silence. Miss Jenny approached Alfie and placed her hand on his tire.
We're gonna refuel you, and then I'm sending you home. You are in no condition to work today.
Alfie didn't answer. All he could hear was the shrieking he heard last night. He was sure he'd never be able to unhear it. After Isabella escorted Alfie home, Jack rolled over to Kelly.
Do you think what Alfie said is true? About the screaming?
I've known Alfie for years, and I've never seen him so upset. I don't know what he heard, but I believe him.
Do you think it has something to do with that?
It certainly does seem that way.
And Kelly rolled away to start work. The pack worked in complete silence. They were all thinking about Alfie. With Alfie and Oliver out of action, Jack had to work all by himself. The poor front loader was soon exhausted. He began finding it hard to keep his eyes open. He had just lowered his bucket and was just about to go for a small sleep when he heard something. It was a bleeding noise. It sounded distressed.
Is that a lamb?
The bleeding continued, growing progressively louder. Jack rolled steadily towards the source of the sound, which led him right behind the church. When he peered around the corner, Jack gasped in horror. There was no lamp but instead sat Miss Jenny's Jeep, burning brightly.
Fire!
The men ran over and saw the burning Jeep. Jack's Banksmen ran down the lane to phone the fire brigade. Jack and the others sat at the bottom of the road, watching the black smoke rise from behind the church. Eventually, the fire brigade arrived and managed to extinguish the Jeep, but it was now a charred wreck. The fire had also damaged the back of the church, leaving a large black mark on the wall. Miss Jenny was thankful nobody had been hurt, but her confidence had been shaken tremendously. With much regret, the pack abandoned the site, as did the council. The pack had all been rather disturbed by the ordeal, particularly Miss Jenny, who confided in Kelly that night in the yards.
I just don't understand how my Jeep got behind that church. I left it parked by...
The stones?
Miss Jenny nodded and walked sadly away. The story of what happened spread, and soon the standing stones were abandoned. Tourists and residents were now unnerved by them and wanted nothing to do with them. Every now and then, that feeling of dread would return if an engine ever looked directly at them while passing. I think it's best that the stones are left alone. Don't you?